Welcome to the Horsewoman's Almanac.
This is a modern field guide to what horses can teach us about changing our world and ourselves.
This podcast is for anyone craving a deeper life, a wilder perspective, and maybe just a little less existential spiraling.
I'm Caroline Culbertson.
And I'm Beth Behrs. Thanks for being here.
Kate, all three of us are somewhat similar ages, and you also just had this milestone birthday of turning 40, which happy birthday.
Happy birthday!
2 days ago?
Oh my
48
God,
hours
brand
into
new.
being 40. How does it feel?
I will tell you, in case you think there's like a sudden wisdom that comes on that day,
Bummer.
I don't think it's right on the day.
Dang it. I'm a couple months out. I was hoping you'd tell me.
It must come over.
Okay.
Just this idea of kind of the evolving identity. And Kate, you've been on this path of identity for a lot of your life. And I want to kind of rewind to this very pivotal moment in your mid-20s. You got an email that really completely changed your understanding of your past and who you are and how you were situated in the world. So take us back to that moment. What happened?
So I was born in Alaska. I knew that. I grew up in Minnesota, have spent nearly all of my life in Minnesota, and never really felt like I fit into, this northern Minnesota rural farming community. But also, it was the 90s. Kids can be really cruel. So it's like, who knows? But I always felt like I just didn't quite fit in. And being a chubby-cheeked, brown-eyed, dark-skinned kiddo and being surrounded by, honestly, a lot of like blonde hair, blue-eyed kids.
You're like Caroline's, basically.
Yeah.
Also, if no one is watching the video version of this, Kate is literally like, and I thought this, and I know we're not supposed to like comment on other people's appearance and all that stuff, but whatever. I'm fine with pregnant. You are one of the most beautiful.
This is my favorite.
You are one of the most beautiful women I have
beautiful.
literally ever seen.
I second that. When she came on the camera, I was like, oh my God.
So anyway, it's a treat to look at you on the camera today.
Amen, sister. And you know what? It's nice to hear it at 40, I'm sure. So, Kate, you deserve this.
Thank you. It's something I've grown into because I spent a lot of my childhood, my early 20s, and getting a lot of questions of this. This happens a lot, I think, to people who are ethnically ambiguous. Getting a lot of questions of like, where are you from? No, but where are you really from? And that just I think it subconsciously wears on you. And my family had always told me that, I was white. I grew up in Minnesota. And so, and I had a challenging childhood. Both my parents were alcoholics. That household was really dysfunctional and really chaotic. And so I actually was estranged and am still estranged from my mom at the point when I got this email. And the email told me that the man who had raised me, who at that point had passed away 8 years before that, probably was not my biological father. And that there was an Alaska Native man who likely was my biological father. And I remember it sent me on this, like, it was.
I can't imagine.
It sent me on this tailspin, because as much as, you grow up thinking, I don't feel like I am who I'm being told I am. Also, you create this identity for yourself. So it was really, I had very mixed feelings. It was identity shattering. And I think, from the outside, this can seem really exciting, but there's no like dummy's guide for how to go find your family. And there's which is actually something that I want to change, because I think there are a lot of people who want to reconnect with their heritage who don't have opportunities to. So I'd love to be able to provide resources to people like that eventually, because I thankfully was able to find my family and go meet my brothers and go back to my birthplace and connect with my heritage and have them be really welcoming. And it really opened up for me this whole other side of who I am that now I've been able to really fully embrace. But I got that email in 2012. Now it's 2025. It took me years to become comfortable with that and understand that. And my understanding of it is still evolving. And that I think is, with identity, it's like not everyone necessarily has a revelation like this, but who we are and how we present ourselves to the world, how we present ourselves to us is always changing. I can tell you though that this is the most me I have felt since I was like 6 years old, which is really beautiful.
What tools, as you've been evolving, I'm reading this really beautiful book on life transitions, and it can be anything from something like that, something from like deep grief that comes out of nowhere, deep grief that is a long term, something's coming. It can come from there. It was written by an Olympic diver who her whole life was a diver and then had to retire after she messed up at her last Olympics. Like in these huge life moments of, I would consider like a stripping of identity, a massive transitional shift in your life as you're still evolving, which I think is also one of the key pieces. And I don't know if you would agree of not expecting there to be a beginning, middle, and end to this, that each
Oh,
year that
yes.
goes on, but were there any, just for anybody listening, because I'm sure people are relating in different ways, like specific tools that just got you through even like the first month of that? Like what did you cling to, or was there nothing and you felt lost? Like was there anything that grounded you?
At first, I felt really lost. Honestly, at first I was like, okay, and I went online and did as much research as I could. I figured out like, here's my family, here's where they live, here's how much I know about what I think is my tribe. This was before, like all of the at-home DNA testing was really big. It was just
Right.
come out. So I ordered all of them. And I did all of them because I was like, I don't trust one, but I trust five. And they all came back. They all came back with the same results. And I was like, oh, okay.
Oh,
Well, so that I think was something that, you know, we're such an evidence-based or seeking society. So that was something that I needed for me, before I felt comfortable believing this, to be honest. And the resources though that I eventually found, because I'm also mixed race. I'm not all Native American. I am also, so the tribe I'm from is called Tlingit, which is a specifically Alaska Native tribe that's in that Southeast Alaska area. And then I'm also European. And the mixed race experience is a really unique and challenging one. And I actually found there are some good Instagram accounts that are for people of mixed race. And they have listening sessions and workshops. And I remember the first time that I was in one of those listening sessions, and there was no purpose other than to all be together. And I remember seeing all the little faces on that call, and none of us looked like each other, and none of us looked like a typical American, if you will. And I just felt this huge sense of relief. And, people who are not from my background spoke about, this is how I feel. And I thought, even though my experience is unique to me, this feeling is not unique to me. And so that was really helpful. I also really like, speaking of podcasts, I really like the podcast. Glennon Doyle and Abby Wambach have a podcast called We Can Do Hard Things.
Yeah.
And I love what they bring, and Amanda's in it, Jim. I love what the three of them bring to that, because there's this mix of like very woo and very, logical, and how do you accept all these parts of yourself that you might be unfamiliar with and that you might not know how to love, and realizing that we're all on this journey, right? We're all in the messy middle, I'm pretty sure, for our entire lives.
And one of the things that you had talked to me about when we were chatting before too is like you felt this deficit almost of, can I really claim this identity because maybe I'm not native enough?
Mm.
How do you feel about that now?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a very common phenomenon, and I'm gonna get a little deep here, but obviously most of my work is focused on covering, the Indigenous community here in the United States and beyond. But the idea of being not native enough is rooted in colonialism, right? It's this idea of that there's shame associated with being Indigenous, and then there's this idea of and as European settlers came to what is now the United States, there was lots of intermarriage and then children who were, both of European and Indigenous descent. And that also was very purposeful. At one point, the idea was to try to eliminate quote unquote Indian blood, which is a really, really heavy idea. And so and there's this thing called blood quantum that was used by the government to identify literally how Indian are you? How much Indian blood do you have? So like I know the percentage of Indian blood that I have, which if you think about that, it's very scientific, it's very othering, and there's no other group on the face of the planet where you try to identify, other than, let's say, doing a at-home DNA test. But there's nothing where you walk up and you have a card that says, I'm this much Italian, I'm this much Swedish. And so it's rooted in these ideas of, well, how native are you? And a lot of people think of the native experience as, well, you need to have grown up on a reservation in community. And again, just based on what our tribal communities have experienced, lots of displacement, lots of dispossession. There are, really strong native communities, but they're in the middle of urban centers, which is not the same as growing up, on your ancestral homelands. Or there are people like me who have been disconnected from their heritage, who are working now to reconnect with it. And so I think imposter syndrome doesn't even begin to describe it. I felt my previous identity had been, understanding myself had sort of been shattered, but I didn't feel like I could rightfully step into this new identity. And I think that subconsciously, honestly, that was part of what made me want to start covering Native topics. I realized, so I'm here in Minneapolis, in 2020 when George Floyd was killed, I really thought, am I using my time and my talent for something that matters? Can I do greater good? And that's when I realized that, was uniquely positioned to help tell our Indigenous stories. But I think there was also a part of it, not only wanting to bring awareness to, the issues our communities face, also was about giving myself an opportunity to learn. And it's through that learning and people welcoming me in, trusting me to hear their stories, to share their stories, and telling me their own struggles of growing up Native and trying to bleach their skin in the bathtub because they wanted to be whiter, having all of these very extreme experiences that I thought, if they are willing to tell their stories, I'm also willing to share mine, which was part of the reason why I really wanted to write that essay that I wrote for The Guardian.
I loved that essay you wrote. And I loved how you also, and I think it was in that essay, talked about the father, I'll call him your adopted father, but the father that you grew up with and
Yeah.
fishing, and then the salmon fishing. Oh, where'd that come from?
Oh,
The
wow.
salmon
She's a
fishing.
Southern gal.
That was out of nowhere. But then how, once you found your native identity and the tribe that, you shared, ancestry with and all that, the parallels between how connected you felt as a young girl in Minnesota fishing with your, white father, and then as an adult with this new identity. I love, can you talk a little bit about that and your experience of that?
And I think we live in such divisive and really divided times where the emphasis is on how we are not alike and how we are dissimilar. And I think that was part of it. I was like,
I think we're
I
like
grew up in,
addicted to it,
oh
honestly. I
yeah,
think we're
yeah.
addicted
Yeah.
to
It's,
that.
yeah,
And
totally.
we really categorize, right? We really want to put people into these boxes. And
Boxes.
so
Yeah.
for me, I like couldn't really understand like how can I be in both of these boxes at the same time? Am I even supposed to be in this little box that I've, been placed in and continue to put myself into? And that was a really like soul opening experience, not eye opening, but soul opening experience to realize that it's not quite the same fishing, on Minnesota lakes for like sunfish and walleyes versus, out on the ocean for salmon. But to think that my ancestors, on my Tlingit side grew up, they did this, doing this thing. They survived doing this thing that I grew up doing. And then I think you start to realize, and for me, that was really comforting. And it brought me this sense of, okay, I don't know everything about this side of myself. The funny thing is, like, as though someone who does know their heritage somehow has their identity totally figured out, right? But even though I didn't know everything about this side of myself and I'm still learning it, that doesn't mean that I don't have the right to sit comfortably with it. And I think the person who was creating the person who was preventing me from stepping into that at that time was me. And I needed to get to that place where I realized that I could step into that part of myself, which I think that anyone can relate to. Even if it's like Caroline, we were talking about, motherhood and things like all these different transitions. Where am I good enough? Am I worthy enough? Am I doing whatever it is enough? And realizing that no one else's standards determine if you are worthy. And so all the things that I think a lot of women, struggle with, especially if you were born and raised during certain eras, during the 90s, especially, around belonging and worthiness, all that stuff came up for me. And it was like, now's the time that we really start digging into this because I had no other option but to face it.
You also talked about how, as a young kid, you struggled with this feeling of belonging. You struggled with feeling like you didn't belong, but you always felt like you belonged with the horses. And you said to me, and it like gave me goosebumps, that you felt like you spent so many years after that chasing that feeling in other areas of your life. And you also have said that a lot of Native Americans would relate to the idea that horses really saved their lives. But I think that's like a really shocking and bold thing to wrap our head around. Why do you think that is the case?
Well, for me growing up, I think part of it, for anyone who's been around horses, all of these facades that we present to the world of like, this is who we are. Horses don't see any of that. They don't care about
Or those
any.
categories that, like those
Yeah.
boxes that
Those
we
little
try to check ourselves
boxes.
into.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They care about, they really feel the energy that you bring. They care about the treats that you bring, right? They have priorities. But there's something I think so pure about that. And they are so sensitive and so powerful at the same time, right? And they are these really magical, mystical beings that allow us to work with them, to ride them, all these things that if you're a logical person are entirely illogical, and yet it happens. And so I think there's for me personally, that just felt like that was a place of acceptance of this horse can feel who I am. I don't even have to say anything and is accepting me for who I am. And, it's interesting for, again, a lot of the people I've interviewed who have had horses in their lives, a lot of these, native thought leaders, and there's lots of other documentation and stories about this, but that that horses have always played this super important role in Indigenous communities. So there's like the very practical role of like it made hunting easier and, transportation and all of this. But also, Yellowstone actor Mo Brings Plenty, who I've been able to spend some time with, talks about he told me about how when he was a teenager, he actually tried to commit suicide because of the shame that he felt about his just being Native American, and he almost quit acting because Beth, I'm sure that you've seen plenty of this where it's like it's a tough industry to be in. But there was actually someone who had introduced him to this ancient breed that actually was descended from Sitting Bull's actual horses. There aren't a lot of left of them. And like being
Whoa.
around these horses reignited his enthusiasm and energy for acting. And I think going back to life's purpose, I think it made him realize like, yes, I may be worn down, worn out, but this is not about me. And so I think there's something also about this idea of what horses make us remember, right? That you need to be in the present moment, that you need to be understanding what energy you're bringing and aware of, and you also have to be aware of everything going on around you like they are. So I think there's something really beautiful about that. But also, I think there are so many people outside of the Native community as well. Like this isn't an exclusively Native experience to have horses be, transformational in terms of influencing our lives.
I I did not know that, but that is such a beautiful parallel of like that finding that breed that was tied to Sitting Bull that then reignited his love of acting. There's an actor named Glenn Turman. He's African American. He's a great cowboy. Equally as talented as acting as he is as a cowboy. And I asked him, he was on our show this year, and I asked him like, I was like, I just sometimes I'm just like, I just want to quit and like be a horsewoman. And like, how does acting like exist with you with horses? And he's like, looked at me just deadpan and like no break in the pause or anything. It was just like, acting doesn't exist without horses. One doesn't exist without the other for me. And when
Huh.
you were talking about Mo Brings Plenty, I was like, oh, like he found, and you so eloquently living in the present moment. Like there's certain parallels to being a creative and a performer that I think go so beautifully with being a great horsewoman or horseman. And for Glenn, it was like interchangeable, which I'm so black and white because that's our society and my type A Capricorn. That I was like, oh, right. One can just exist with the other. It doesn't have to be like, well, I'm just going to be a horsewoman, acting, whatever. Like, I don't know. That like blew my mind right there on such a deep level.
The expectations that we have of ourselves and that societally we've sort of learned around, I mean, even growing up, like I was definitely a child who growing up was told, and like not really even by my parents, like my parents are wonderful people and I think they're very accepting of who I am, but by other people like, wow, you're a lot, like especially for a girl, like you're kind of a lot, like you're a big energy and a big personality, and like you might need to tone. I remember actually someone saying you might need to tone that down at some point in your life. And
Oh, as a
so
mother,
it was just this first time that I it was actually a coach, and it was the first time that I remember being aware that like, oh, like what they're asking me to do is sort of to suppress
Yeah.
pieces of who I am, or like my exuberance or my joy, or things like that. And with that like also comes like I feel big in a lot of different directions.
Yeah.
And I think as then as a sport, as a horseback rider who was brought up in kind of the sport world, I mean I was always told like emotions do not belong in horse training. And so then that kind of doubly confirmed to me that you got to just bring that like way down. And like Kate, I think that you would probably relate to this idea too, that in being a writer and being an editor and interviewing people, that you do. I mean, this is why like this podcast is so fun, because I don't have to completely hide who I am. Like I can have a little bit of a personality on here. But like part of your training is to not interject your experience into somebody else's to color it a certain way, like that objectivity. And so
Yeah.
there's all of these ways that we're sort of taught to like tamp down who we are. And then, but the thing that I always struggle with is like, yes, I think that the idea that emotion doesn't belong in horse training, to a certain extent, like, yes, that's true, as in you don't want to be punitive to your horse because of an emotional outburst you're having. But also, the thing about horses is that they know
No, yeah.
whether or not you think you're suppressing it, you are not suppressing it well enough for them to not notice.
It's all emotions. Yes, you don't want to make an irrational decision that is not fair to the horse or fair to you, based on like in that second you felt this way. But they're feeling everything that you're bringing. I remember before I got Ethel, I had a gelding who was like, I joked that he would have been like, there's candy in that van? Sure, I'll climb in. Loved everyone, skeptical of nothing. And I could go to the barn after a hard work day and I could dump a lot of stuff on him. And I didn't realize at the time I was dumping a lot on him, but I was. When I got Ethel, she is so sensitive and so in tune and so particular. I remember one day, like, I came to the barn and she, like, moved to the back of her stall. I opened, the stall door and she moved to the back. And I was like, what? And I realized that, like, I could not ride her that day. She did not want to be ridden by the version of me that came in the barn. And that was really important for me to realize, like, oh, okay, I think that I'm masking this so well. Whether it's, how that day has been going, or Caroline, this idea of like, oh, well, you're too much. I was a super sensitive kid. And at some point, I was not told this directly, but the message became, you cannot be this sensitive and exist in the world. It is not safe. It is not accepted. And I'm just now, over the past few years, really starting to embrace that part of myself again and realizing, like, just like horses, that their sensitivity is their superpower, that's my superpower too. I'm a Cancer. I feel everything for everyone. And so, I think there is this idea of like, we can't make rash decisions that aren't suitable to like the training that we're doing, but like training horses, riding horses, being around horses, it's all emotional, right?
You've seen horses in a variety of different roles for people. You were executive director of a nonprofit called This Old Horse, which I love because my husband watches This Old House. And then you're also a former therapeutic riding instructor.
I'm really curious, Kate, how you feel just having also grown up, because you were a horse girl as a little girl as well. So you've had them in your life much longer, like Caroline, than I had. I didn't do anything until I was an adult, and I literally the only way I got started with horses was Two Broke Girls. There was a horse on our set, and I noticed that like I was so much calmer and happier when the horse was around. And one of our co-creators was like, I have this woman, she does this equine therapy thing. You don't even have to ride, but like I was having really bad panic attacks at the time. So she was like, go see her and whatever. Cut to like after the first session of being around the horse, I was like, my road rage was gone. I was like, I'm so calm driving back it was in Topanga at the time and I lived in the Hollywood Hills. And I was just like, oh, this is a game changer for me. And then I've also, and that started a process of learning to ride bareback and bitless and like coming from a really putting the horse first element into then actually equine therapy, because when we moved our horses in the first huge Malibu Topanga wildfires in like 2018, we went to an equine therapy barn, and then I got to see veterans and autistic children. And I mean, there were kids who weren't verbal at all, and then they get on the horse and they're verbal. I mean, I saw just the most magical changes into like dressage is very new to me. And I do feel a lot of times, even in therapeutic settings, like, are we doing right by the horse? By
Mm-hmm.
kind of what you said when your mare walked away and how much you put on the gelding because he was able to sustain that.
Mm-hmm.
There is still this part of me that I am still struggling with as a horsewoman too, about how much I can put on my horses emotionally, how much is okay,
Yeah.
and also sport. And also now I
All
find therapy is huge in our society, which
yeah.
is great, but how much are we putting on these horses? So,
All the things. So I grew up riding Western, right? I was in this small farming community. I didn't have horses. I begged my horses. I actually created like this presentation. This was before like PowerPoint and things. So I think it was like on a big poster. And I was like, why I should have a horse. And they didn't go for it.
oh,
I love that.
that's
I
does a
was
horse
like,
go right
I
away?
have
That's
$200. And we lived on a farm. So I was like, and I was like, we have a barn. That's where the horses live. I don't know what else you need. I've thought this all through. But so I rode friend horses. I went to horse camp. So I was not like a competitive rider. I just knew that I was always drawn to them. Like anytime, like county fair, state fair was automatically go there. Or if there's a horse movie. I mean, I had like horse posters all over my room. I was that gal.
Wild
And
hearts can't be
Hearts Can't Be
broken.
Broken. Best horse movie of all time.
I
I still watch
recently
it. I love
I
it.
recently rewatched it, and just at the very beginning when the music started, here come the tears.
No way.
Um,
I
Oh my
need to
but
rewatch. That just made me want to rewatch it so much.
yes. And I think this happens to a lot of people that when I went to college, I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm not going to have access to horses. And that's just that. And I think a lot of people think like, well, I'm going to give that up. And I think there's this idea that horses are a hobby and that might be frivolous, right? Where it's like, well, that's not, you need to go work and get a job and all these things. And I've totally shifted my perspective on that because I think that like horses are, this is gonna, it's a very privileged thing to say, but horses are a necessity in my life. I don't know how I would exist in this world without them. And I've often said like I think the world would be a better place if more people had access to horses. So therapeutic horseback riding was actually how I got back into horses. And I started volunteering with this group and I saw, similar to you, Beth, I witnessed like these horses bringing out whether let's say someone's, not ambulatory, all of a sudden they're moving on this horse and feeling what it's like to walk. Or you have
Mm-hmm.
someone who's nonverbal who is able to communicate. Or I remember there was one client who had seizures regularly. And, we're in the middle of the class and the horse just stops. And we're like, come on, what are you doing? And it was because he felt the seizure coming on.
Oh my.
And within like 30 seconds, his rider had a seizure. And so it's absolutely incredible. And in ways that like, yeah, we can study it and try to create research about and like data points about it. But once you witness it, it just reaffirms what we already know of how healing horses are. And so then when I became a riding instructor, I also then I managed one of our sites here in the Twin Cities is with the organization called We Can Ride that had numerous riding sites. And so part of my job was to help, like oversee the care of these horses, to bring in new therapeutic riding horses, to train them. And I will tell you, not every horse is made for it. Like
Mm-hmm.
go, we'd go like essentially test out horses and you could instantly tell if they were like, and sometimes it was physical things of, riders aren't always able to control what their bodies are doing, but it's also like how much of this like emotion can you put onto them? And some horses, no, that is not, they can do lots of other jobs. And sometimes their owners would be like, I can't believe he doesn't want to do that, And so I think that there can be a tendency to think of horses as tools because, throughout human history, they also have been used in
Mm-hmm.
that way, right? But I think we're shifting more to this mindset of like, well, what is our responsibility also as like their advocates? And, there's this idea of how do we, if we have horses that are in our care in any capacity, not just what are we doing to, like make sure they have food and shelter and water and all these basic needs, but also like, are we doing anything unfair? That could be training. That could be I'm showing up after I had a hard work day and now I expect you to give me your all. And I'm not going to show up and give you 100% of, my good energy, good intentions, things like that. So I think that's a really beautiful thing, Beth, that you're like that thoughtful as a horse person because let's be honest, not everyone is.
I saw also firsthand, and I haven't shared this on this podcast yet, but hearing your story about the seizures, one of the reasons I fell in love with horses as healers in general was my sister is a survivor of sexual assault, and talk therapy wasn't really doing much for her after the assault. And when I started working with this equine therapist, I was like, oh, my sister, I just had like a gut instinct, like this kind of work will be great for her. And
Mhm.
so we signed her up for it wasn't for sexual assault survivors, it was just like an on the ground somatic horsemanship
Yeah.
weekend. And this huge horse named Chief, the instructor knew about her past because we were friends and had her like draw a circle around her. And my sister was very fearful of the horse. And she was
Mhm.
like, they were in the round pen and she was like, do not let him in. I like get chills telling it, like makes me want to cry, but like, do not let him in until you feel strong enough to let him in. Hold the boundary, like hold the boundary, come into your body. And this horse, when I tell you that my sister just started weeping, and this horse, there was a circle. He put his like front hooves on the circle and just like looked at her in the eyes. And then you could just see her release and like invite him in. And like, I just like, and probably that's when I went like, oh, this is so much bigger than something I can like understand. But like, even knowing the seizure, I agree with you. Science, there's no science to me of that. Like, that is soul. And I love dogs. Like, I lost my heart dog. I love dogs, but there is something healing innately about horses. And I don't think it's just that they're prey, right? Like, what do you guys think that is?
I think part of it, okay, here's my theory, but I welcome adding layers onto this. I think part of it is that they are prey animals and that we are like the apex predator on this planet, right?
Yeah.
They allow us and they could, with how big they are, let's just say like they could kill us if they wanted to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not only do they not do that, but they allow us to do so much with them. So I think there's something about them being prey animals, something about versus like a predator animal like a dog. Something about how big they are. And I think there's just like I can't even articulate it. There's this magical sort of mystical element about them that we're never going to be able to capture in some, research data, but that it's like, why is it, you can get the same feeling from a dog that I think the idea is that the dog wants to please you, right? The dog's like,
Hmm.
I love you so much. I want to do this for you. The horse, I don't know that like pleasing a human ever shows up on their list of priorities or interests. And yet they're like, I think that you want to do this. I'm willing to do this with you, or even that experience with your sister, which that was beautiful. Thanks for sharing. That horse was like, oh, I understand what the dynamic is and
Yeah.
what my role is in this. And I think that's really beautiful. But I open like layers onto that hot take.
For me, I think I actually probably bond more tightly with dogs. Um, and I do think that part of this is this ongoing journey that I'm in of someone who has lived my entire 35 years as like an analytical, science-based, very if I can ask it, I can answer it kind of person. Like there's an answer for everything and everything is figure outable. I think I have a really hard time letting go of that. And just in the past few years of my life, I've had these experiences that have honestly forced me into reconciling that not everything is knowable.
Right.
And I think that that's probably like the basis of spirituality, but I think that that's why we always have horses in this conversation of spirituality and of identity and how we see ourselves in the world, because there is something about them that is, I mean, again, I started riding when I was a child and I have been around horses. I mean, I don't think, like, maybe except for my honeymoon, I don't think there's ever been like a period of longer than probably 2 weeks where I have not been on, around, feeding, rehabilitating, doing something with horses. And I still feel like I have a hard time accepting that part of it. And I wonder if that has blocked my relationship with a bunch of horses, because with dogs, I'm like, I don't need any more information. Like I know why we're so
Yeah.
bonded, like, but with horses, there's something about you I don't understand, and it makes me uncomfortable.
Mm.
And I think I'm
Oh,
just realizing that, which is crazy. And I probably should have figured it out before now.
no, I love that this is on
Yes,
the,
on the fly that we're learning this. I mean, I think there's also like I have a very, like logical side of myself that wants all of that evidence. But going back to like the story of the journey that I've been on, I firmly believe that like the universe, so if I believe that, telling Indigenous stories is my life's work, I would not have gotten there if it wouldn't have been for literally every step along the way. And that includes like growing up not knowing this part of my identity and getting that email from my mom and struggling with that and having my family accept me. Like there were so many things that had to work that are sort of unexplainable, right? Because the way our world works would tell you that like, well, it's not going to happen, right? That I remember when I went to go connect with my family, my Tlingit side of my family, my assumption was that they were going to be like, no, we don't believe you, we're not interested. And they were immediately super welcoming. And it was sort of mind blowing to me because I sort of wanted to be like, I mean, I sort of want to be skeptical on your behalf. I would like you to be more skeptical. And so I think that and I joke now that I very much trust the universe to put the right things in front of me. And sometimes if I don't listen the first time, then the universe is like, okay, we're gonna have to say it bigger. It's like with horses, right? How it's, there's sort of the when you're riding at first you do like a gentle ask, then you do a firmer
yeah.
ask, and then you're like, hey, you're not listening to me. There have been times when the universe is like, all right, guys, we gotta like make this big because she's still a little skeptical. And there's something about it that is, and I think that's for Beth and me, the woo-woo gals, like that's why we love horses, is because it is unexplainable. And you you can't put data to it. You can't put logic to it. And I think we map ambitions onto horses, going back to like horses versus dogs. We map ambitions onto horses that we would never map onto dogs. Like even if let's say you have like agility dogs, I think it's just a different type of relationship.
And like you said, also, I think that element of like this animal, well, I guess like a big pit bull or German Shepherd could quote kill you too, but we maybe because of the size of the horse, that innate
Yeah.
fear that you have to push through to be around
Mhm.
horses every single day. There's something so vulnerable of that, which I think is in some ways like a spiritual vulnerability is a spiritual path. So there's no escaping that. You know what I mean? I don't know. The mystery of it all is both one of my favorite things to talk about and also something that I am desperate to get a black and white answer on.
Right,
Like,
which
I
which
want to
as
figure
far as
it
I
out.
Yeah.
as far as I can tell, there will not, because right,
Never
humans have been partnering with horses for like millennia, and I don't think have ever figured this out,
figured
which
it
is
out.
so fascinated by them.
And why they're such a great archetype in film and art and all
Yes.
of the beautiful, like, creative elements that, I feel like they really ignite in artists too.
Hmm.
Um,
And I'm not surprised, like we talked about creativity at the beginning of this conversation, then went into horses. Like there are a lot of similarities between that, right?
hmm
Creativity, it's this idea of like this lightning in a bottle. We talk about, how do we stay energized? We're not necessarily, sometimes we're talking about actual energy to get up, and work that day, but it's something else. It's this intangible. And I think that we choose to exist in these worlds that it's like, dare I say it, that messy middle that cannot be defined.
We are so conditioned in the sport world to think of
Mhm.
horses as being something we can fully grasp and fully control
mm,
and control all of like lots of variables around. We've manufactured these entire lives for horses that like would not
yeah.
exist otherwise. And I'm not villainizing sport at all. Like
Yeah.
I think horse sport is an amazing way for like a lot of people, but like you were saying, Kate, earlier, like if the world would be a better place if everybody had, experience with a horse. And that can be as small as just, petting a horse or being around them. It certainly does not have to be riding them, and it certainly does not have to be showing them. But like I've had some of my most beautiful, profound life experiences through horses
hmm
because of sport. And I
Oh,
also think that I recognize probably now because I'm not actively training for something, I'm not actively competing. It's not that not that I've had a mind shift.
mhm.
It's that I became aware that I had a mindset.
Yeah.
Um, and
Mm,
I was like, oh, that is a mindset that I have that I should potentially be open to changing a little bit. What changed it was the when I saw my horses with my children. Like I
oh,
cannot explain it, quantify it, like rationalize it. It was absolutely insane. First of all, my mare knew that I was pregnant with my first baby, like
yeah.
Yeah.
immediately. So different with me. Was all of a sudden like putting herself between me and my gelding. Like she would like position her, like if I would go out in the field, because my mare and my gelding are turned out together, she would not let him come over to me. And like he is it pecking order wise in the herd, like he's above her. And
Yeah.
so she actually ended up like whapping him, like kicking at him to keep him away from me. And I was like,
Oh,
what is this? And I was like
Yeah.
checking my pockets. I was like, do I have treat? Like what is this?
Yeah.
What is this? And just this insane intuition. And then the way that both of these horses, who are sport horses and competition horses and all of these things, like can be sensitive and can be pretty high strung, the way that they hold this like space of protection and
Yeah.
stillness, how
mm,
still they are for my kids, like I can't, I almost like can't watch it because it like it's too much. Like it's
Yeah.
freaks
almost
you
like
out.
so much to witness that I'm just
Yeah.
like I can't even look. Like this is so
Yeah.
because I went into the experience of having kids on this farm where I also have my horses being like, I got to keep everybody separate. I got to keep everyone
Yeah.
safe, got to keep everybody separate. I've seen some really awful things happen, with kids and horses because it does happen. So I was like, it's not going to happen here. Like, going to keep all the everyone in their different corridors.
Yeah.
And then I realized that, like, I mean, with parameters, like the kids are not allowed to go in the horses' stalls, that kind of thing. But like the way that when they can interact with each other, the horses want my children to be safe. Like they
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
be still for my children.
For
And
sure.
that's that thing where I was like, how do you know that these little kids are helpless? And how do you know what they need when
Yeah.
Mm,
I barely do and I'm their mother? Like just
yeah.
so
Yeah.
profound. So profound.
Well, and I think like it's easy, especially for people who are outside of the horse world, to vilify the sport of it. And like I'm a
Yeah.
competitive competitive dressage rider. And I love how you phrased that, Caroline, that it was like you recognized that you had this mindset because, okay, dressage attracts a lot of very type A people because the idea is like you're working toward perfection. You will
Mhm.
never achieve it, but you can always better, right? Where you're like, sign me up. And then it's like,
Yep.
I
too
am
much
ready for a
flow.
life of punishment.
Yes. I'll never be
Yeah.
perfect enough. So freeing.
And I,
But
I
I'm gonna
get, I
try.
literally get on a piece of paper everything I've done
I love
right.
that part of
Wrong, I
dressage.
can do better.
Yes.
And
Oh,
so I with Ethel retiring her and early by a lot of standards because usually you'll be retiring a dressage horse more as they're like getting into their late teens, early 20s, and all that depends on like the horse, their life, what they've experienced, all these things. But so I haven't talked a lot about this, and it was hugely challenging. I think it also spurred some of these life-changing things I've chosen to do recently. But um, I became super achievement and accomplish driven with my training with her. I have my dressage, people will understand this. I have my bronze medal, I have my silver medal. She got me halfway to my gold medal. I was like, I'm an adult amateur, but I'm one of those crazy adult amateurs who's like, I want to train my own horse to Grand Prix.
good
And
for
so we
you.
were
There aren't many like that. That's amazing. Yeah.
and we were working toward that. And, that's a really challenging leap. I remember my trainer said when we successfully showed I won, my trainer said, congratulations, have a small tour horse. Not many people achieve that. And instead of recognizing that, I said, yeah, but we need to get to Grand Prix. And
Mm.
so I was so hyper focused on that. And then last spring, Ethel suffered a career, thankfully not a life ending, but a career ending injury. Fluke in her stall came out, and it was like, oh, she'll never be the same again. Don't even know what happened, like if she cast herself or what happened. Spent lots of time and money and effort figuring out, like, can we get her to a competitive point again? Because I was so focused on the
Hmm.
competitive factor. And I did not realize, like, I am so lucky that she is healthy and happy enough that she can still exist in my world and in my life. And, when I first got her, because she is such a specific horse, she's like this big, bold boss mare, not for everyone. But I was like, I will have her for her entire life. And something in me switched where I realized, like, this is not about, like, what can she do for me? This is
Mm.
now, I need to remember that this is also about what can I do for her. And so, yes, it was really hard to retire her at 15. And, there's this idea of like, where does the money come from to pay for multiple horses, all these
Yeah.
things. But she is so happy and she's able to live like a very full life. It just means that like we're not going to go down center line and show. Um, and that reminded me of like, we all got into this because we love horses. It's about the horse. It's not about what the horse can do for me at the end of the day. It's about I'm so blessed to be able to even have them in my life. And that has really, I think, set me on I still compete, but it set me on a different path of like how I view it.
I just had that happen. Speaking of like coming and not having done sport, I worked my booty off with Blue, trained for this like big dressage Arabian show in Del Mar. And like right before it, he was having some like eye stuff that we weren't sure what was going on. So I wasn't sure, obviously, if like, and I had never felt that sort of heart-wrenching part of the sport where like it was something my husband said to me. He was like, man, you have worked so hard together at this. It would be heart-wrenching. And I also only get to show like once a year because of my schedule, whatever.
Yeah.
But he was like, God, it will be heart-wrenching if you don't get to go. And at first I was like, oh, the same kind of thing of like, I've worked so hard. And by the way, we're talking like intro level, like not Grand Prix. So from your standpoint, the fact that you've come full, like around to being able to go like, it's not what she can do for me. It's what, like, what they've given us. Like it, but when sport is involved, it's way different than if something happens to
Mhm.
Belle and I'm there every day with my little rescue horse. It's like she has some
Yeah.
ailment because I don't require anything from her in that
Right.
way. But it was, and then my dressage trainer was like, welcome to horse
Oh,
sport. Look, horses, something can happen at any minute with any level of horse.
and they're these like they're so delicate, right? They're just
Delicate, yeah.
and they're powerful, but they are so delicate and they like goof off and do all these things where you're like, no, no, please don't do that. Like
Yeah.
I
But you're like,
want
but
you
you're also
to
a wild animal. And like, what are you
exactly.
gonna
You're also
do?
allowed
Yeah.
to run around. And I think that that's also part of it. It's like it's why we do it, right? Because like they have our whole hearts. The hard part of them having our whole hearts is that like it can be heart, like you said, heart wrenching. And I remember that I had these moments where I was like, when I was going through like the possible rehab process of like, can we bring her back? I remember that I was like in this stage of like, I will trade anything. I would have sold my soul to someone to be like,
Yeah.
can she come back? And then that was before I'd realized that that's not the point.
Yeah.
That being able to ride them and show them, like that's all extra. And
Yeah.
just being able to be with them and to feel all of these things we've been talking about, right? That you can't really articulate. That's the whole point of it. And so, I have a different now I'm riding my young horse. We're doing, training level and she's like, "Oh, wow." Sort of like starting fresh, but also I'm trying to really be mindful of it, sort of like not bringing your bad habits from an old relationship, right? Where it's like
Right.
I want to make sure that I, as much as possible, even though I want to succeed, I want us to accomplish things. It's not solely about that. My success is not in life, is not in any way contingent on this. And my barn friends and I would joke like because a lot of people in the dressage world are also super accomplished women in like their professions and things like that. When you go back to work after a show on a Monday, no one's going to be like,
Yeah.
I heard the
What
half
was your
pass,
score?
I heard the half pass didn't go well. We're actually demoting you. And so we had to be like, this has no bearing on real life. Like, let's realize, like, let's not get so down on ourselves.
No, or the adult amateur women who feel so insecure about their performance in the saddle. And I'm like, you're going back to neurosurgery on
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah.
By the way, like my co-stars, when I got Blue, who is like a Pinto, and Belle is a paint, completely different breeds of horses. To me, they look completely different. They were like, "You got a new horse?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's been all over my Instagram." They're like, then I show them, they're like, "That's not the same horse."
They're
Like
like,
I go in on a Monday and they think my two horses that I have that I think look, first of all, they're completely different sizes. I mean, just one is huge and one is a pony. But like, you're just like, oh yeah, like I'm sitting there reading my lines with like Cedric the
that's
Entertainer,
phenomenal.
and he's like, "You did a half pat, what? Like what?
Yeah.
And
Well,
you're
yeah.
like, and yeah,
And most
but
of the
that's what's
time,
so fun.
yes. And I think that, most of the time I have to be like dressage. And I'll do like a little,
This thing,
play.
I do this thing, the dancing,
The
Snoop Dogg and Martha.
yeah. Or I'll say like, in the Olympics, when they aren't going over anything, it's that. And usually people are like, oh, okay, I don't watch that.
Sure, yeah,
So that's again where it's like, okay, let's zoom out and let's remember why we're
yes, yeah,
the reason why we initially like loved horses, got into this was not because we were like, are they going to be able to jump this high? Are they going to be able
right,
to successfully do this level of a test? Like whatever it is in sport. But there is like so much to be gained from showing. I think that it exemplifies what we're talking about, that horses allow us to partner with them to this level of achievement. It just can't always be about the achievement.
like. I love to hear about what books people would recommend, like 3 books that that like you say, it doesn't even have to be horse related, just like 3 books for anybody to read. And then also I would love for you to tell me one of your favorite books by an Indigenous author.
An Indigenous author to read. His name is Tommy Orange, and
Okay.
his first book was called There. And it's actually, he grew up in Oakland, and the idea is that there's no like there. So it's
Whoa.
technically, yeah. So it's a novel, but it's also like based on his experiences. His second novel that came out recently is called Wandering Stars, and he weaves together like past and present and all of these beautiful things, and in ways that I think challenge how we think about. This is what I love about Native authors, that they're like, oh, you want the plot line, you want me to follow like this very specific formula for this book? No, I'm not doing that. So it might be that like one chapter is poetry and one chapter
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
and so Tommy
How
Orange
dare
is
you be a multi-dimensional human
Yeah.
being that encompasses multitudes?
All things. How dare
Exactly.
it be like real life? Oh, amazing, Kate. Like I told Caroline, I was so excited to
I
talk
know.
to you
I like
today.
really admire you. I think you're
Me
incredible.
too. You're
Well,
amazing.
and this has been such a wonderful conversation, and I just feel like I'm sure that someone listening to this will think like, oh, they must know each other, because it seems like it's been very like, I feel like we're
know.
bouncing off of each other, which, if you want to, same place, same time next Friday, let me know.
Horse Girl Fridays.
Just our
Here we
weekly
go.
thing.
We're starting it.
Yeah.